was diagnosed with ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, last December, Jenny is now sharing a positive update on how.
Have you ever considered what actually happens when the brightly lit, carefully curated drama of reality television violently collides with a terrifying life-or-death medical crisis? We are conditioned to consume manufactured narratives, heavily edited arguments, and scripted reality. But what happens when the cameras finally stop rolling and the illusion shatters completely? Today, we are stripping away the tabloid headlines to expose a harrowing, real-time crisis facing 90-day Fiancé stars Jenny and Sumit. This is not your standard reality television update. This is a terrifying descent into a crushing intersection of terminal illness, brutal international healthcare economics, and an utterly inflexible border bureaucracy that is currently trapping a failing body in a geopolitical cage. If you want to journey with us into the darkest realities hidden just behind the screen, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel, because what we are about to unpack will fundamentally change how you view the humanity behind the characters you watch. Jenny and Sumit spent years fighting intense cultural taboos and family rejection just to build a quiet, comfortable life together in India. But the foundation of their hard-fought sanctuary did not crack with a dramatic televised argument. It cracked with subtle, insidious whispers of biological betrayal. It began dangerously quietly. A sudden, inexplicable loss of balance while simply walking across a sunlit living room. A terrifying weakness in the hands while performing the most mundane, repetitive household chores. It is human nature to rationalize the slow decay of age, to blame a stiff joint or an overexerted muscle from an afternoon of gardening. You never immediately jump to the catastrophic realization that your nervous system is actively collapsing. But these small, easily dismissed difficulties escalated with brutal, rapid violence. Over just a few short weeks, the simplest physical tasks mutated into insurmountable, agonizing hurdles. When they finally navigated the chaotic streets of India to seek out neurological specialists, enduring a relentless, exhausting battery of scans and tests, the cold clinical results unmasked the absolute worst-case scenario imaginable: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, a progressive, universally fatal neurological predator that systematically hunts down and destroys the motor neurons in the brain and spinal cord. It mercilessly severs the biological wires responsible for voluntary muscle movement, essentially trapping a fully conscious, terrified mind inside a rapidly failing, paralyzed vessel. The progression was merciless, robbing Jenny of her physical autonomy almost instantly. The basic mechanics of human dignity, picking up a warm teacup, buttoning a shirt against the morning cold, simply standing up from a chair, were suddenly impossible. Her muscles were starving, receiving absolute silence from a brain desperately trying to scream commands. And just as they were drowning in the paralyzing reality of this degenerative nightmare, as the medical teams ran comprehensive scans to see if her major organs could even withstand the grueling ALS protocols, they uncovered a secondary, completely hidden enemy lurking in the shadows of her lungs: lung cancer. A dual diagnosis that transforms a desperate tragedy into a staggering, insurmountable medical paradox. Treating both of these terminal diseases simultaneously is like trying to extinguish a raging inferno, while the very ground you stand on is actively collapsing into a sinkhole. To combat lung cancer, oncologists must unleash highly aggressive, systemic warfare, chemotherapy, targeted radiation, and invasive surgery. Chemotherapy is a controlled poison designed to break the human body down to its absolute limits in order to eradicate rapidly dividing cancer cells. Its primary devastating side effect is profound fatigue and severe muscle wasting. This is the absolute last thing a body already ravaged by ALS can endure. The diaphragm, the very engine of human breath, is a muscle. If you unleash the chemical assault of chemotherapy into a neurological system already experiencing massive, irreversible muscle atrophy, you risk completely and instantly paralyzing the patient's ability to breathe. The body simply possesses no physiological reserves to survive the cure. But the alternative is leaving a highly aggressive lung cancer untreated, guaranteeing a horrific, rapid, and painful end. The local medical teams in India delivered a frank, chilling verdict. They could offer basic, supportive comfort, but navigating this specific, lethal intersection of terminal conditions required a highly specialized, multidisciplinary neuro-oncology infrastructure operating in absolute lockstep, an infrastructure that simply did not exist within their immediate grasp. This dual diagnosis forced a violent, permanent rewiring of their entire existence. In the blink of an eye, Sumit was forced to completely forfeit his own future, instantly pausing every personal ambition to transform into a hyper-vigilant, 24/7 medical caregiver. He descended into a non-stop regime of pure survival, managing complex cocktails of medication, physically carrying the dead weight of his fading wife through the house, and meticulously modifying her every meal, because the ALS was already aggressively attacking the bulbar muscles required for swallowing. Every single bite of food became a potential choking hazard. Every night became a torturous vigil, surviving on anxious, fragmented minutes of sleep, while intensely listening to the fragile, irregular breathing patterns of the woman he loved, terrified that the next breath might be her last. He completely surrendered his own independence to ensure her minute-to-minute survival in a terrifyingly foreign healthcare system, where every single emergency room visit, every specialist consultation, and every life-saving pill demanded immediate, astronomical out-of-pocket cash payments. As an American expatriate marooned in India, Jenny was entirely cut off from the heavily subsidized public health safety nets afforded to citizens, and equally stripped of any comprehensive American health insurance that would cover a multi-year terminal crisis abroad. The top-tier private care they desperately needed was a relentless, unforgiving financial vacuum. For years, millions of viewers watched Sumit fight tooth and nail for his financial independence, slowly building his dream and finally opening his own restaurant. But as the out-of-pocket medical bills mounted into a crushing mountain of debt, he was forced to liquidate his dreams overnight. He sold his independent business in a desperate rush for immediate cash, a heartbreaking Band-Aid on a gaping bullet wound. He essentially sacrificed the entirety of his future to buy his wife a fleeting moment of medical stability that evaporated the moment the funds hit the bank. The capital from the rushed sale burned with terrifying speed. It was nowhere near enough to cover the relentless barrage of specialized neurological therapy, the inevitable oncology interventions, and what was rapidly emerging as their only viable path to survival: an incredibly complex, high-risk emergency medical flight back to the United States of America. They had hit the absolute breaking point. The private funds were entirely gone. The reality of their situation was staring them dead in the eyes. Without a massive, immediate influx of capital, Jenny was going to die in a foreign country waiting for care she could not afford. This absolute desperation birthed a raw, heartbreaking public campaign, stripping away any lingering facade of reality television glamour. They laid their complete financial ruin bare to the world, begging the public for the resources to secure mobility devices, at-home nursing, and the astronomical logistical costs of an international medical extraction. The public response was a profound tidal wave of support from disability advocates and loyal fans, but it simultaneously opened the dark, cynical floodgates of intense public suspicion. Detractors ruthlessly questioned why famous television personalities would need to crowdsource their very survival, assuming years on television equated to immense Hollywood wealth. What these cynics completely failed to grasp was the brutal economic reality of cable television contracts, where cast members are paid notoriously low, episodic wages that offer absolutely zero protection against a catastrophic, multi-layered terminal illness. Going public was not some calculated cash grab. It was the frantic, final lever pulled by a desperate husband watching his wife slip into the abyss. The fundraiser established a fragile financial floor, a razor-thin lifeline suspended over an abyss of mounting debt, but it was never the endgame. It was merely a temporary tourniquet. The absolute, non-negotiable medical imperative was extracting Jenny from the privatized Indian healthcare vacuum and returning her to American soil. As a United States citizen, Setting foot in America meant unlocking the locked gates of Medicare, granting her immediate access to the elite, cutting-edge neuro-oncology infrastructure that represented her only mathematical chance at survival. But the geography of their salvation was separated by a vast ocean, and the brutal physics of commercial air travel presented a potentially lethal obstacle. At 30,000 feet, trapped inside a pressurized cabin, a human body ravaged by amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is a ticking time bomb. Her respiratory system was crumbling. Her voluntary muscle control was evaporating by the hour. She could no longer reliably feed herself. She could not adjust her own failing posture, and she absolutely could not endure a grueling, multi-hour transatlantic flight alone. Sumit was not just her husband. He had become her customized biological life support system. He knew the precise, erratic rhythm of her failing breath. He knew the exact physical manipulations required to keep her from choking on her own saliva. He was her absolute medical anchor, and he had to be physically tethered to her side for the entire journey, or she would not survive the flight. Yet, to cross that border and secure her physical extraction, they were forced to collide head-on with an impenetrable, unfeeling bureaucratic fortress. To the outside observer, the solution seems painfully obvious. They are legally married, so Sumit should simply apply for a standard spousal green card. But that logical assumption instantly shatters against the brutal, unforgiving mathematics of time. Spousal visas and permanent residency processing are notoriously agonizing, trapped in a labyrinth of administrative backlogs that stretch anywhere from 12 months to well over 2 grueling years, depending on consular availability. And amyotrophic lateral sclerosis does not respect diplomatic timelines. It does not pause its relentless consumption of motor neurons while a consular officer casually reviews a stack of paperwork in a New Delhi office building. They did not have years to wait. They barely had weeks. Forced into a corner by the ticking clock of her rapidly dying nervous system, they made a highly strategic, desperate pivot. They decided to bypass the immigrant visa queue entirely and apply for an emergency short-term tourist visa. Sumit went on the official record, stating with absolute, desperate clarity that he harbored zero intentions of seeking permanent American immigration. He did not want a green card. He simply wanted to transport his dying wife to a hospital bed in her home country, stabilize her breathing, and step back. But this desperate strategy triggered the most vicious geopolitical trap hidden within the depths of United States immigration law, the rigid algorithm of non-immigrant intent. By strict federal mandate, every single consular officer is legally required to presume that every tourist visa applicant secretly intends to permanently abandon their home country and illegally remain in America. The burden of proof rests entirely on the applicant to provide overwhelming, undeniable evidence of their unbreakable ties to their homeland, proof that they will absolutely return. And here lies the ultimate, devastating catch-22. You have an Indian national, legally married to an American citizen, desperately trying to enter the United States to manage a catastrophic, long-term medical emergency for his spouse. The very factors that make his presence biologically essential for her survival, their deep, unyielding marriage, and his total, singular devotion as her round-the-clock caregiver, are the exact systemic red flags the algorithmic bureaucracy uses to brand him a massive immigration risk. It is a terrifyingly rigid bureaucratic machine functioning exactly as it was designed, completely incapable of accounting for nuance, mercy, or the ticking clock of a terminal medical emergency. The system flagged his undying love and necessary medical presence as a liability, transforming the very thing keeping Jenny alive into the legal barrier keeping her trapped. The algorithm functioned with chilling, robotic precision, entirely blind to the human suffering bleeding out right in front of it. Even when Jenny's daughter, Christina, mounted a desperate political offensive back in the States, pleading with her local senator's office for immediate congressional intervention, the reality check she received was utterly paralyzing. The post-pandemic consular backlogs in India had swollen into one of the most impenetrable administrative bottlenecks on the planet. The grim reality was that even the heavy, authoritative weight of a United States senator was entirely useless against the monolithic inertia of the State Department's rigid protocols. Expediting a tourist visa heavily laden with marital red flags was deemed virtually impossible, regardless of the staggering humanitarian urgency. The doors were locked and the political keys were broken. Trapped in this suffocating bureaucratic limbo, fighting a war on two fronts against failing biology and an unmoving government, their private nightmare was forcibly dragged into the unforgiving light of the public arena. With the paperwork stalled in a geopolitical vacuum, they posted a viral, agonizingly raw video directly appealing to the faceless gatekeepers of United States immigration. Jenny, her speech now terrifyingly slow, deliberate, and slurred as the disease aggressively consumed her bulbar muscles, stared directly into the lens and begged for her life. She pleaded for the fundamental right to return to her own soil, accompanied by the only human being capable of keeping her alive. It was a harrowing, unscripted spectacle of pure desperation that mobilized thousands of viewers overnight. Constituents flooded congressional inboxes with furious demands for a humanitarian override. Digital petitions circulated like wildfire, demanding that Sumit's visa application be pulled from the digital abyss and approved on the grounds of basic human mercy. It sparked a massive, uncomfortable philosophical debate about the brutal tension between rigid border algorithms designed to coldly process millions and the desperate, singular need for human compassion when a life is actively fading away. But as they waited in the excruciating silence of international limbo, praying for a bureaucratic miracle, an entirely new, deeply psychological threat was about to emerge from their televised past, threatening to completely fracture the fragile emotional foundation they were both desperately clinging to. Right in the middle of this agonizing geopolitical paralysis, as Jenny's physical autonomy eroded by the millimeter and their financial reserves evaporated, an entirely different kind of explosion detonated. It was a surreal, deeply disorienting collision of past and present, a bizarre psychological twist that threatened to completely incinerate the fragile emotional foundation they were clinging to. While they were fighting a two-front war against cellular decay and border algorithms in real time, the relentless machinery of reality television churned out a ghost from their past. The highly anticipated spin-off aired on national television, beaming into millions of homes. But the vital, invisible context completely lost on the viewers was that this footage had been filmed over an agonizing year prior, long before the shadows of ALS and lung cancer ever darkened their doorway. The audience was thrust into a brightly lit, heavily produced couples therapy session where Sumit dropped a massive, relationship-shattering bombshell. He sat under the harsh studio lights and confessed to secretly hoarding between $15,000 and $20,000 in hidden debt. He admitted that instead of telling Jenny the crushing truth about their failing cash flow after his parents financially abandoned them, he had quietly taken out massive predatory loans, burying them in a financial grave and locking the truth away in the dark. The footage showcased a perfectly justified volcanic fury from Jenny. The cameras captured the raw, unedited betrayal warping her facial expressions as she openly questioned his basic respect for her and fundamentally doubted why they were even bothering with marriage therapy at all. If you analyze this moment strictly through the predatory lens of reality television tropes, it is the classic, unforgivable betrayal arc. It is the final, fatal lie. And the tabloids immediately lunged for the throat. The media machine weaponized this timeline confusion, gleefully fusing the year-old televised betrayal with the current, real-time medical tragedy. Vicious online articles and rabid social media commentators began painting a horrifying, distorted narrative of a physically vulnerable, despairing woman, utterly trapped in a foreign country, actively dying while anchored to a deceitful, manipulative husband whose financial lies had doomed them both. The public was screaming for her to leave him, demanding she sever ties with the man who had hidden $20,000 of debt. But this manufactured outrage entirely failed to comprehend the brutal, recontextualizing power of a dual terminal diagnosis. Yes, Sumit lied. Yes, his historical deceit engineered a massive financial burden. But when you are staring down the barrel of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and aggressive lung cancer, a financial betrayal from a previous lifetime fundamentally shifts in cosmic significance. The metrics of their partnership had been violently rewritten by the immediate, desperate need for biological survival. The public demanded outrage over an old bank statement, while completely ignoring the staggering reality that the man who signed for those loans was currently staying awake for 72 hours straight, physically lifting his dying wife from her bed, monitoring her collapsing airways, and forfeiting his entire existence to keep her breathing. A medical crisis of this apocalyptic magnitude does not erase a fundamental breach of trust, but it instantly incinerates its immediate relevance. Refusing to allow the tabloid vultures to feast on their tragedy, Jenny and Sumit mounted a desperate, real-time defense against the algorithmic outrage. They shattered the media's narrative of a crumbling, bedridden victim by posting raw, undeniable video proof of their current reality. The footage was stark and deeply profound. It showed Jenny, visibly weakened but fiercely defiant, actively fighting the muscular decay. She was still walking. She was still speaking, but she was doing it entirely anchored to Sumit's physical frame. He was right there on camera, bearing the literal weight of her failing body, his hands firmly supporting her shattered nervous system. She stared directly into the lens and delivered a crushing blow to the tabloids, explicitly stating that she is able to survive solely through the unwavering cooperation of Sumit. And without missing a single beat, he stood beside her, holding her upright, and quietly affirmed that he is, and always will be, completely there for her. This is the darkest, most raw definition of human resilience. True partnership is not defined by a flawless, conflict-free history. It is not about navigating life without ever making catastrophic, foolish mistakes. It is entirely, brutally defined by who actually stays in the room when the absolute worst-case scenario breaks down the door and becomes your daily reality. Sumit's relentless, exhausting actions as a 24/7 caregiver speak with a deafening volume that entirely drowns out the ghosts of his past financial deceit. The televised betrayal that the world was obsessing over was reduced to absolute trivia when compared to the gravity of the crucible they are currently surviving. They are running an unimaginable gauntlet, completely at the mercy of systems infinitely larger and vastly more powerful than themselves. They cannot negotiate with the aggressive mutation of cellular biology. They cannot halt the cruel progression of neurological decay. They cannot force the monolithic gates of diplomatic border processing to open any faster. But they have proven to the world that while they cannot control the terrifying machinery of the universe, they maintain absolute, unwavering control over how they show up for each other in the dark. They are demonstrating that true, unscripted devotion means fighting quietly, with agonizing grace and absolute dedication, all the way to the bitter, terrifying finish line. We are so incredibly conditioned to consume reality television as cheap, disposable entertainment. We sit comfortably in the dark, safely behind our screens, judging these manufactured characters for their highly edited drama, their scripted arguments, and their foolish human errors. But when the producers pack up the cameras, when the heavy editing stops, and when real-world catastrophic tragedy strikes, we are forced to reckon with the profound suffering of real human beings. Watching their grueling fight for survival and their staggering devotion to one another should fundamentally shatter the illusion of the screen. It forces you to rethink everything that happens after the credits roll, demanding a level of empathy that reality television was never designed to invoke. If this deep dive into the harrowing reality hidden behind the curated drama of your favorite television screens opened your eyes, you need to solidify your place in this community right now. Hit that like button to push this truth through the algorithm. Leave a comment below with your raw thoughts on their devastating geopolitical fight for survival, and absolutely subscribe to this channel. We are continuously hacking through the manufactured narratives to expose the darkest, most compelling real-world stories they don't want you to see, and you do not want to miss what we are uncovering next.